Lisa, it's
All
all
right.
yours.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. I can't believe this is my last time with you. And Jim and I had talked earlier this week about the fact that you guys are working on leadership, so that's the portion of Spiral Dynamics. I'm going to talk about leadership styles, but I'm also going to talk about something that another person hit on tonight about listening to different perspectives and the concept of diversity and the concept of race and how it impacts us in educational settings. So we're just going to jump right in here. So what is someone low? Oh, you don't have a dimmer?
No.
All right.
All or nothing.
Can everybody see that? Okay, because it looks really bright to me. Okay, so the question I have for you are, what are prejudice, discrimination, and racism, and what are their differences? So who wants to take on prejudice? What is that?
Certain beliefs that we have for or against something.
Okay. Anybody else want to add to that? Okay, we're going up the scale. What's discrimination?
I'd say acting on that set of beliefs that we have.
All right.
You know, negative connotation.
Like it. What about racism? What's that? Nobody wants to take on racism. Neither does the country. All right, I'll let you off the hook. So I found this awesome meme like 2 years ago on Facebook, and I thought it did an excellent explanation of those three concepts. So the first one says, feelings of dislike for a racial or ethnic group plus belief in that dislike is prejudice. And so the concept is cumulative. So you add prejudice to actions that harm those you have prejudice against, which would be considered discrimination. Then adding to that compoundly is institutionalization of this discrimination, which is perpetuated in society, and essentially when discrimination becomes part of how the society does things is racism. When it becomes structural, it's racism. When it becomes a part of policy laws and the way people conduct business is an example of racism. And what's important to note is that we all negotiate within what I call memetic paradigms of superiority. And I'll go into more details about that. So let's do a quick review of memetics, because I want to make sure everybody understands its uniqueness from maybe some other concepts like symbolism and stuff like that. So memetics is a theory and a form of academic study holding that mental units of culture that we call memes operate and transfer through non-genetic imitation. Examples of memes include images, beliefs, songs, policies, etc. Memes mirror the biological gene construct because it also uses the procreative process of replication, variation, and natural selection in order to remain relevant. And that's important, that the meme has evolutionary properties just like a gene does. And that's the idea behind that rhyming names for them to help make that association. A meme differs from a symbol or symbolism because of that property. So symbols do not engage in processes of replication and variation. With a gene, it would be a mutation in order to survive in this environment. So the meme makes variations in order to be relevant to the social context. And so I gave y'all that Dove commercial where they took the meme and they just kept changing it around. But the overall message was this notion of black skin being problematic and dirty. So has anybody seen one of those before? Yeah? Yeah, okay, cool. So I don't know if you guys know that last week, California is the first state that passed the third category for gender. So you have male, female, and then they created another gender alternative. But you'll notice here that we have these categories here that relate to race, and then we have this category that's called Hispanic or Latino. So my next question for you, what is race and how does it differ from ethnicity? Who wants to take that one? Y'all heard of ethnicity? Mm-hmm. Have you heard of race? Mm-hmm. Have you been puzzled like what really is the difference? I have been, I will admit it. So that's because it's a social construct. Now that's not to abdicate the fact that racism does exist in society. And this, I guess, gets to be a little existential. Things become real as we give them meaning, and we codify them in the way that we conduct ourselves. So race is real, even though you can't point to something in the natural world and say that's the race gene, but it's definitely real, and we used it in our society in issues of classifying and creating hierarchies in our society. But with the help of the U.S. Census, race is white, black, or African American, Asian, American Indian or Alaskan Native, and Native Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islanders, or two or more race is a race. So that's the official classification by the U.S. Census Bureau. So wasn't that clarifying, right? And so then we have ethnicity that is actually under the U.S. Census, but it's unofficial, right? So ethnicity is a category of people who identify with each other based on common language, ancestral, social, cultural, or national experiences. So yeah, that we understand. Okay, so Hispanic or not Hispanic was one of the choices on that earlier slide I showed you in terms of what you kind of like see with job applications. The word Hispanic is relatively new. And now, in some social contexts, you had a mimetic shift to the inclusion of this word Latino. Then you have Latino, Latinx, right? Those are all mimetic shifts. At one time, I remember when I was director of intercultural relations, there used to be a category called Chicano, which was representative of Northwest, people who were from Mexico and that particular cultural context. But what's interesting to note about this is that you can be black Hispanic and white Hispanic, right? Or you can be black or African American. Now, if you would think about somebody who's from continental Nigeria, what would they be?
Nigerian.
Is that a category? So what would they be with the census? Two or more? They would be black? Oh, interesting. Why you say that?
They come from Africa.
So if they come from Africa, they're not black?
Well, they don't distinguish themselves as black.
They don't call themselves black? So
I met some Nigerians who don't call themselves black. They call
I have
themselves
too.
Nigerians.
Mm-hmm. But in terms of a census classification, most likely than not, they would classify them. Do they classify themselves as white?
But they might use that other box that's on the thing.
There's no other.
Well, when you go on that other slide you have.
That's only other for Latino. They would have to pick.
Oh.
And so most of the Africans I know do consider themselves black. This is why I was saying earlier how it's a social construct. And it can become problematic when you start talking about things like affirmative action, scholarships, opportunities that might be based on the redress of past historical wrongs. And so you can sometimes have people who will step into minority spaces for the benefits they might get from it. So here's a chart. So in this chart, we have these categories: black, Hispanic, Asian, and white, right? And this is a chart of unemployment. What does that chart, you guys are graduate students, so you should be able to look at a chart and make analysis. Tell me some things this chart is telling you. Let's start with education. What does it say?
Is it African Americans have the highest dropout rate?
Is that dropout or unemployment? Yes, unemployment.
Yeah.
So black unemployment rates among people with no high school diploma is almost twice in any other group. So what else is this chart telling us?
Education is the equalizer.
Yes, education tends to bring more parity as it relates to employment opportunity. What else is this telling us? Yes.
The unemployment rate is lower amongst the more educated people.
Correct. Also, note this. So when you look here, the white and Asian unemployment rate are equally as low. And even when you look at Asians in comparison to other groups, here they have the lowest unemployment rate. Here is a little bit higher than white. But in terms of other groups that we typically classify as a minority, they seem to fare a lot better. So when you talk about classifying people in a particular racial group for purposes of redress, it becomes kind of complicated. You need to aggregate these kind of data, because even those people who are self-identifying as black in there, could they be black African? Yes, of course they can. Could they be black Latino? Yes, of course they can. So I heard this story about a teacher who was very insensitive, and a Latino student walked into the classroom, and the teacher goes, "Congratulations, you surpassed the blacks as the new minority in the country." Okay, highly inappropriate, but I think highly false. Because when you look at those classification systems, the Latino group, according to the census, is a minority group classification. But a person could be a white Latino, so they wouldn't be in a minority group. Equally, a person could be a black Latino. So if you were to look at that group in terms of Latinos, in terms of a minority group, maybe it is larger because many of those who have formerly considered themselves black would have got classified as Latino, but still be black. So in terms of the raw numbers of minorities, it may in fact not be that the blacks have been surpassed in terms of numbers in the country as it relates to Hispanics. Interesting point. So again, here's another chart. What is this chart telling us? Anybody see anything about that chart that stands out? Who makes the most money? What men? Asian men. Who makes the most money and women?
Asian women.
Look at the chart carefully. Oh, it is Asian women, isn't it? Okay. I didn't know that. I read it my point. Okay. But who makes the less money? Right. So, let me throw something out there for you. If some of the metrics of quality of life are showing us that Asians are faring well in American society, would it be appropriate to say that Asians face a lot of racism in this country? Or would it be more appropriate to say Asians face a good deal of prejudice and discrimination, but not necessarily structural racism? Because the metrics you use to look at structural racism, at least when I used to work at EEOC, was things like quality of life metrics of income, health, those kind of statuses. Just in those two charts that I showed you, the Asian population was faring well. Now, what might be contributing to that? First, we have what I call the model minority mean. And so this is from a 1987 Time magazine cover. Now, we saw this cover here today in the 21st century. Wouldn't some people go like, you know, that's a little inappropriate for you to make that kind of broad classification for all Asian groups. But in 87, you know, that was all the rage because Asian students, at least in particular, were being touted as the model minority. And so I did a little digging in terms of just that whole notion of the classification of Asian. And I thought this was very, very fascinating. So, the term Asian was an idea invented in the 1960s to bring together Chinese, Japanese, and Filipino Americans for strategic political purposes. Soon, other Asian origin groups like Korean, Hmong, and South Asian Indians were added. Although many Chinese, Japanese, and Filipino immigrants arrived as unskilled workers in significant numbers between 1850 and 1905, and largely settled in Hawaii and California, many Vietnamese, Cambodian, and Hmong arrived in the United States as refugees during the Vietnam War. So, in 1965, there was a shift in American immigration policy that resulted in a higher proportion of highly educated Asian immigrants entering into the United States. Thus, images of Asian success has led to the model minority meme, and also criticism by the United States of participating in drain from other countries. So when the immigration policy opened up, it made it easier for more highly educated Asian groups to come into the country, hence contributing to the economic metrics that we see in the earlier charts. Higher education, higher skill, higher pay. Isn't that interesting? I thought so too. So the next thing I want to talk about is the doll test. Y'all remember the doll test? Okay. And I want to talk about the diametric nature of anti-blackness. So Brown versus the Board of Education in 1940, Doctors Mamie and Kenneth Clark were a part of Thurgood Marshall's argument to desegregate. And as a result of that argument, they did this doll test where they presented white and black dolls to children. And they asked them questions like, who was the pretty doll? Who was the smart doll? Who was the evil doll? Who was the bad doll? And consistently, the black children identified positive characteristics to the white doll and negative ones to the black dolls. And so Thurgood Marshall made the case that this is why we need to desegregate the schools, because if the children are in proximity to each other, then white children will see that black children are just like them. Nice theory. 1980, the test was repeated. What do you think happened? Same results. Because it is not within an isolated context that race influences all of us. It's out in the whole society, right? And so the test was repeated in 1980. You had similar results with the black children favored the non-black dolls. And then in 2015, they introduced this notion of what is called colorism, right? So this is a memetic evolution of racism, where you have a color gradient that was presented to children with ranges of skin tone. And so we're going to let everybody see what happened there.
Remember, you asked what skin color do you want? Do you remember which one you said?
Yeah, that one.
Which one?
This one.
Why do you want that skin color?
Because I don't know. That one.
Not sure. What do you think of that skin color?
Well, it looks kind of whitish, and that's what I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you? Why do you want that skin color?
Because it looks whiter than this kind, because this looks a lot like that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just don't like the way brown looks, because the way brown looks really nasty for some reason, but I don't know what reason.
So you think it looks nasty?
No, not really, but sometimes.
Sometimes. And Brielle, they asked what color adults don't like. Do you remember what you said? Which one? That's right, that's what you said. Why do you think adults don't like that color?
Dark.
Dark. And adults, you think adults don't like dark?
Maybe some adults do, but maybe some of them don't.
Hmm. And then which was the ugly child?
That one.
And why was he the ugly child?
He was the ugly child because he was the ugly one because when he would try to go to school, sometimes all the white kids would make fun of him.
Why were they making fun of him?
Because of this color of his skin.
Does that happen sometimes?
Not now, but back then it did.
Back in the old days?
Hmm.
Why did that happen back then?
Because I think the people in the school didn't think that like the black kids should get education like the white kids did.
Mm-hmm. Are there now, do you see differences now between black kids and white kids?
No.
Do you think some kids do see differences?
Yes.
In what way?
Well, maybe some people still think that blacks are ugly and whites are nice and handsome.
Why do you think they think that?
Because of what they heard, maybe.
Why do you think things have changed? You were saying that in the old days, people with different skin colors were treated differently.
Because Martin Luther King Jr. I think helped make black and white go to the same schools as black ones.
And you think that changed people's opinion?
Some, but some didn't change their opinion.
So do you see difference today? Is there a difference between a black person and a white person?
Not really.
Pretty much the same.
Yeah. They're people. They're the same thing.
They were asking about skin color. When you think about skin color, what do you think?
I think it's kind of magical because I think like we're not all the same, we're different. It doesn't really matter what color you are. It just matters what you're like inside.
Do you think some people think it matters what skin color you are?
Yeah, some people do. I wonder why they think that. Yeah, your color is kind of who you are. It makes you you.
Why do you think do some kids treat other kids differently because of skin color?
Probably because they're not like them. So they probably say that they're not like them. So they don't want to be their friend.
And one of you was asked about the skin color that most teachers think looks bad on a girl. And you said, I don't think it matters. They want to help you learn. It doesn't matter what's on the outside, only on the inside. You said that. Explain that. What do you mean?
Like, I think the teachers that are mature, like they don't really care what color you are. They just like want you to get a good education.
Did you see any difference between those girls?
No, they all look pretty friendly.
They all look pretty friendly?
Yeah.
Do you think some people would see a difference, or do you think most people would just say they seem pretty friendly?
I think most people would say that they look pretty friendly. That's the right thing to do. You don't judge people how they look, you judge how they act.
Show me the dumb child.
Dumb child.
Okay, why is she the dumb child?
Because she has black skin.
Okay. Show me the bad child. Why is he the bad child?
Because his people are dark.
Show me the dumb child. Why is she the dumb child?
Because she looks black.
Show me the good child. Why is she the good child?
She looks whiter.
Show me the child you would like to have as a classmate. Why would you like to have him as a classmate?
Because he's white.
Show me the child who has the skin color most adults like. And show me the child who has the skin color most adults don't like.
Well, show me the ugly child. And why is she the ugly child?
Because she's black.
Show me the good-looking child. And why is she the good-looking child?
Because she's light skin.
And show me the skin color you believe most teachers think looks bad on a girl.
I don't think they think it matters.
They don't think it matters.
Like it doesn't matter what you look like on the outside, it just matters what you look like on the inside.
Can you show me the child that has your skin color?
Yeah.
Show me the child that has the skin color you want.
I want that one.
Okay. Show me the child who has the skin color you don't want. Show me the child you would like as a classmate.
All of them.
You like all of them as classmates? Why do you say all of them?
I don't really care what color they have.
So this goes to your point about how you said some Nigerians who don't consider themselves black, because there are tropes that exist that are historical about black people, and particularly American black people. And these concepts of colorism also impact people interculturally. If you go to India, lighter-skinned Indians are more favored in that society than darker-skinned Indians. Even in Asian countries like China, you have people who are held in higher esteem, particularly women, who have fairer skin than those who would have darker skin. So as I said, this experiment was repeated again in 2015, but with Latino students. And so here you have the Latino students, and it was consistent. They found that all of the virtues that were positive were associated to the white baby, and then those that were negative, they associated to the black baby. But what was even so fascinating, this little boy got asked afterwards by the researcher, well, why is that black baby, bad? And he said, because he hits others. This dog who didn't speak a word, it reminded me of George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin and the tropes that people have in their ideas about people of color. And we used to always say, well, the children are the future, they don't see color, but it even contaminates them as well. So I think I mentioned to y'all before that when I go on break, I teach in Columbus City schools. And so I was teaching a music class over the spring break, and they had this lesson plan in there. And this is no offense to the teacher. She's a great music teacher because she also had another lesson. But I hate when I go in classrooms and teachers got worksheets. And so this one was so outdated. And it talked about MTV. And if you notice here, the images, now this is that Columbus Afrocentric School. So very few of the children look like the ones in this picture. But we still continue to promote materials in school that are representative of a particular standard. And I don't think that representation is representative of the Black and African American students who were there. But the part that was really funny in a way is, well, I'm going to go back to this part, but they mentioned Elvis, I think Dolly Parton, Steve Aldrich. Them kids out there, Sonny and Cher, them kids have never heard of those people. But in this section here, they start talking about rap music. And it says, indeed, there are increasingly more violent crimes being committed in society today that may be directly linked to the influence of music videos that introduce these types of things to very young viewers. So essentially they were trying to say like rap videos and stuff were contributing to violence. And we even have politicians who got on that little train and were using that. And so there's a rap research lab that is in New York by this guy who's a rap enthusiast and also a journalist at The Atlantic. And they looked at record sales in relationship to societal crime rates and also violence. So here you see the rise of rap music and a decrease in crime rates. Here, in terms of violent crimes, between 1980 and 2014, as rap music sales increased, violent crime decreased. So that was a meme that was made in association to a racist trope. That black people are violent, the gangster rap was making people violent. Just wanted to share with you how powerful memes can be in society. So now we're going to identify and do show how the spiral dynamic theory framework can be used for purposes of leadership development. But I want to do a quick review. So remember that spiral dynamic theory operates on the individual, organizational, and societal level. And I think I've given enough examples to support that. And so we had the beige that was representative of basic instinctual. We had the purple, which is the magical, mystical worldview. We had the red, power impulsive. The blue, saintly, purposeful, follow the rules, obey authority. The orange, wolves of Wall Street, materialism, competitiveness, and manipulation. The green, holistic living, being in commune and consensus building with others. Then we had tier 2. We had Oprah sharing with us about how to navigate complex and complex flows of life. And the one I described as postmodernism, I think I might change that name. In any event, we had Neil deGrasse Tyson, who talked to us about holistic views of the world and how he doesn't preoccupy himself with isms. Then we had the gentleman from MIT that talked about bioengineering and what I consider a more futurist idea. And then we had the next level yet to be fully developed with a person to articulate this, but it held that, yes, there's this integration of AI with bioengineering, but AI was limited in comparison to the awesomeness of human beings and the capacity we had to engage in emotions, intuition, and wisdom could not be simulated with artificial intelligence. So again, the spiral dynamic theory moves from simplistic thinking to more complex thinking. Everybody got their handout? Okay. So I wanted to mention again how the framework moves between this individualism and collectivist themes. And remember, we zigzag up the framework as we move into issues of complexity. I also want to emphasize the most tension occurs between systems that are horizontal to each other, and the most sympactical happens with systems that are very, vertical tension, horizontal simpatico. So here you have this guy, when we had the Leonardo DiCaprio character, would be admired by this person because they learned how to achieve power and control without always having to watch somebody trying to stab them in the back. Because the Leonardo DiCaprio person had developed these broader capacities to negotiate problems such that he didn't draw direct opposition to him, that he manipulated people to feel like they were on his team, but it was really all about him. So I want to go a little bit deeper into one of the systems, and I'm going to look at the orange one and talk about how memes function in relationship to these, what would be considered meta constructs, right? So here I use this orange construct, the spiral dynamic theory, orange. And so each color-coded meta-construct or value meme attracts content-rich micro-memes that come together to form a particular deep value worldview. That system reflects how one makes decisions and prioritizes their life. This is where the complexity comes in, because a person, according to Claire Gray's theory, has a predominant orientation, but they still have aspects of themselves that are a little bit from other systems. Usually, he says that you can express yourself in 3 neighboring systems. So here you have a person who may be blue in their religious expression, they may be orange in their business philosophy, but they may be very racist in their ideas about discrimination and people from other ethnic and racial groups. They may be red in their sports. And so this person, you know, you might see them on Sunday Night Football. Yeah, get them, kill them, don't kill them, you know. But, you know, but they're not really out there killing people. You know? But what's important to know is that the predominance of the little memes that make up how this person views the world are orange. And so these constructs are not like, oh, you're orange, you're green, you're blue. It's hard to do that. But you can get a generalized orientation on that person's perspective of the world. And they can surprise you because somebody might say something that's like, wow, I didn't believe that would come from you. That's because of the complexity of human beings. That we have, remember I talked about how you have deep values and hidden values? So there are parts of us that we don't necessarily want people to know, but they still make up who we are. I hope that makes sense. And so in this particular representation, you have an expressed dominance of an orange worldview, but still you have these components of who you are that may represent other systems in particular areas. So I want to talk about how change occurs in spiral dynamic theory. And I use a blood pressure example because I think that it was helpful. And thank you, Daddy, for letting me use you. I know you didn't want me to tell everybody our business, but it helped me explain it. So when you talk about change in spiral dynamic theory, it happens in particular ways. So first, there must be the potential for change, that the system is open for change. Remember how I said before that change was not inevitable in spiral dynamic theory? A person could live out the whole of their life with one particular worldview, and there is no overarching imperative for them to change the way that they view the world. You want to be homeless citizen for the rest of your life? I'm cool with that. Don't bother me. I'm not trying to be complex in my life. I pay my bills. I take my kids to Cedar Point once a year, and my marriage is fine. I'm not trying to run for Congress. So the first thing for any change is there has to be an open system for change. So the potential must be met through acquiring new insights. And those new insights have become disruptive with how you currently view the world. And so you look to solve the problem that those new insights have created for your once stable life. And so that problem is recognized cognitively, and you understand a need to address that problem is the next stage. Then you have dissonance, and this is where you can have the regression. So you have the spiral dynamic theory framework, where once a person faces existential problem or crisis, they will regress because you remember how you solved the problem before, but then you realize when you try to take that approach, it's not satisfactory because the way that you operated in the system before is no longer relevant to your new reality. So it's not appropriate for you to punch somebody in the face in your new context. So you have to get new insights that will allow you to move to the next level. So clarity comes in as you gain new insights about the problem and the regression stops. And so these strong enlightenment points are recognized so that you can move forward to the next level. Now, in order to move forward, sometimes barriers have to be removed. So you can come into the reality of, yeah, this is a problem, this is how I need to solve it, but I have a barrier. So in order to consolidate the change, you need to have that barrier removed or neutralized. It could be a person and it could be a policy, whatever. But as that barrier is removed, then that change dynamic can be consolidated and a person moves forward to another level. So as I said before, I use my dad as an example. So my father, I think I told y'all part of my family background is Native American. My father's family from Oklahoma, Creek Indian, and my father don't believe in taking no medicine. He just feels like, you know, medicine is ridiculous and people take too much medicine, pharmaceutical companies trying to kill us. And so he has high blood pressure though. So I would describe my father as red-blue system, right? I think it'd be fair to say I grew up in a very patriarchal system. My father is a very stubborn man, and so he needs to take his blood pressure medicine because we want to keep him around. So my appeal to him is at the red-blue system. So I go to him, I said, Daddy, you know you're the head of this family. What are we going to do without you? If you don't take your medicine, you could lose mobility, you could have a stroke, you could just be not being able to be independent anymore. People are going to have to roll you around in a wheelchair. Do you really want that to happen? So then, you know, he's going like, no, not really, you know. So then the barrier is getting him to consistently take the medicine. So what's the barrier I need to remove? His consistency. So it's like, Mommy, you have to give him this medicine every day at the same time so it becomes habit. And that's what she did. So now he takes his blood pressure medicine. So I had to appeal to him on the level that he could understand, and it was something that he could accept as a new enlightenment point. That makes sense to everybody? Mm-hmm. Okay. So each one of these color-coded systems has their own change mechanism. So those factors where enlightenment points will be gained would not be the same for somebody in green as it would be for someone in red. Hence my example. So in Claire Gray's research, he actually used these percentages because he said that most people, I guess, straddle 3 systems, and in some instances you can maybe be 2. And he actually used these percentages. As a scientist, I have a problem with that because I don't think you could say a person is 60% centralized in one particular system. Because a person could be peak one system. Maybe they're 80% in red and 20% in purple and 0% in beige. And I just use this as an example. But what was important is the pattern that he says is used for change. So here you have in the literature that they use to describe spiral dynamics an alpha. Then you run into an existential crisis. Then you have the regression. Then you have the new insights that take you to a new alpha. Then you have an existential problem. You have a regression. Then you get a new insight. So this is the pattern of change. Now, let's do our critical analysis small group. So I prepared some scenarios for you all, and it should be enough for everybody. So you are going to read, hopefully we'll do number 1 and 2. I don't know what our time allows us to do because I want to get into leadership styles. But I'd like you to read these scenarios and try to identify what types of worldviews are in operation with these actions. Okay, I know I said I was going to give y'all 12 minutes, but since you already discussed it so richly, I want you to do the second one too. So let's go to the first one real quick. What did you guys think about Principal Eric? How did you identify his worldview? Anybody?
Red.
Red? Okay.
Orange.
Who said orange? Raise your hand if you thought orange.
I had red orange.
Red, orange? Okay. Raise your hand if you had red. Okay. And raise your hand if you had any other color. He's orange. And he's not red because remember we go from simplistic to complex thinking, and that you'll understand that better when I go into the leadership style. A red person will be very a principal would not be red. That's the best way I can describe it before I go into the leadership style. Because remember, the red is that one I used from the Game of Thrones. So that person is like remorseless. That person is willing to engage in physical imposition in order to get control of people. But what's fascinating is y'all are on the right team because orange and red are on the same team, remember? So he is more orange because of his attention to competition, right? He wants to maintain the fact that his school is the best and you're going to do everything. We're not going to have discipline records. So you keep them in the classroom. You're not doing no 190s. They're not coming down here. You keep them in the classroom. And so at the same time, he's a little bit, controlling because he goes into the teachers' classrooms and interrupts their pedagogical approach to their kids and kind of embarrasses them, on occasion. What did y'all think about Sheila? Yes?
We kind of think she is going through something. This is her. She's green. We think she's green. She's sprouting into yellow because she's realized I'm done with this, so she's going through that change.
You got it. Yep. Green and yellow. Okay, what about the faculty? What about the faculty? What y'all think about the faculty? And there go ahead.
We were thinking blue because they don't want to rock Eric's boat.
You got it, sister. Yes, they was like, we are not gonna rock the authority,
I really need it.
Go ahead.
Sheila also be a little bit orange too.
Yes, how so?
Just because of her determination as far as trying to get input, pull the other faculty members in.
That would be more the green, but I think the orange part in terms of the independence and asserting herself.
Right.
Yeah, so I would think more green, touch of orange, entering yellow. See, all those systems are by each other. Absolutely. Very good, you guys. Let's do the next one. I really like this one. The cultural and religious conflict in education. Okay, so I'm going to stop you all now because I do want us to get into the leadership styles before I have to end. But what did you think about Principal Watkins? What did y'all think about him? Orange. Did you see anything else with him? I thought he was peak orange. That's how I tried to characterize him. What about Mrs. Jones? Purple and what else? Blue. Yes, purple and blue. A little bit of red because she was like, I'm going to the power authority because you tripping, you're not doing what I want. So there's a little bit of red when she imposed and she felt disrespected that she was going to go complain to superintendent, board of trustees, whatever it was, board of education. What about Ms. Davis?
Greenish, but kind of bluish green.
Who said bluish? I saw her as blue too. Because if she was green, I think she would have challenged the principal.
Yeah, and she didn't.
She didn't. Right. She had greenish ideas about trying to, but she still felt like the girl needed to follow the rules because she was going to be in school suspension. So she wasn't trying to thwart the rules and policies because those need to be followed. So I thought she was blue as well, with a hint of green. Very, very good. You guys got it. Okay. So I want to talk lastly about using spiral dynamic theory to identify leadership style and conflict resolution. What I thought was so interesting how a lot of you guys associated red and orange system, and that makes sense because they're from the same family, if you will. And so the reason why I said red would never be a principal is because when you look at the structure of leadership in red, there is one big kahuna. And then everybody always fighting to get to be that kahuna. So in the red, it is an express self system for what one wants remorselessly. Rancorous conflict is foundational to this leadership style. There is no peace around this kind of leader. So a school would not function well with that kind of leadership in principalship position. Dominant group members are constantly seeking to become the person in control. Therefore, limited peace is not sustained within this environment, and the new emerging leader viciously highlights the frailties of the previous fallen one. Centralized leader controls the group and disallows conflict. Now, they're cool with conflict when they try to get in charge, but once they get in charge, nobody fights. No, fighting is over because I'm the one in charge. So even though a lot of people saw this red because those characteristics are controlled in the orange, but a principal in that position would be a nightmare, and they probably would be fired or asked to leave the system. So here in the blue system, you saw that single pyramidal leadership style. Usually when you see in blue systems, you have more than one pyramid of authority. And so here, this might be one administrative pyramid and then another pyramid that would exist for teachers, where you would have maybe a senior master teacher who may be heading this system and that faculty, and then you have another one that is representative of the administration. So this is the sacrifice self now in order to gain reward later, blue. Leadership is assumed or understood often based on seniority or education or something along that line. It is authoritarian in nature, and I don't mean authoritarian in a bad way, but we know that typically in school systems, you are under the obligation of policy, rules, and procedures. It's authoritarian in nature, and more than one pyramidal system of leadership can exist at the same time. There is often some isolation of members. So these people, there are sometimes people who are kind of like little men on the totem pole. Disagreement occurs in this system, but it's not where people are raising their voice. So you be in a staff meeting and somebody don't disagree, and it's like, well, I don't really see it that way. You know, it's a little more civil. There's disagreement, but there's not this rancorous, you suck. That's why we, like you would see in red. So the next leadership style is, I call this one the big wheel that you would see in orange. So the leader is located here in the middle, and the leader controls who has proximity to them, right? So the people who are closest to them, they think they're his friend, but nobody's his friend. The leader in the orange system manipulates those around them, right? And so it's like kind of like that Godfather thing, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. The person closest to them are probably the one who's the biggest threat to them, right? Who's the biggest threat to their leadership. So again, this is another express self system at cost in order to obtain desires with little shame or guilt. So leadership control over others is consolidated after a competitive fight for power, right? So there is this struggle for power. The above big wheel model represents that. The centralized power figure actively controls all the others, and they aren't even aware of it. When we think of that Wall Street example, remember how he threw the watch and he told them to fight over it? Do you remember that? That's an excellent example of this kind of, worldview mindset. So in this system, power figures actively control all others and determines how much information, delegation, and access to the leadership is allowed by the members. So this one is representative of the green leadership style. And this one is like, I really struggled to create it, but I think I captured it very well. So in green, you still have the sacrifice self theme, but it's not sacrifice self for reward later. It's sacrifice self for reward now. So the best representations I thought of these is like what you see with Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement. Because you all start off with this kind of centralized agreement, but there is no leader. You pair off into these kind of like little subgroups, and everybody works on the problem in their own group, and then they come together as a collective to agree upon strategy. So let me read this one. So in the sacrifice self now for approval, hence reward now. Single person leadership is avoided in this model and given only when assigned by the group. There exists more than one flat type of organization among members in subgroupings, and it's usually based on previous acquaintances relationships. So you form these little groups with people who are they're your buddies, you cool with, like, I trust them. And we see eye to eye, we from the same worldview. And so you gather with that person and with that group. And so again, there's more of a decentralized leadership, but there is a kind of leadership, but it comes from a consensus after consultation with everybody in the group. Does this make sense? Like, you can't join Black Lives Matter. There's no National Association for Black Lives Matter, like the NAACP at one time. It's just everybody kind of doing their own thing, but there still is a centralized theme of addressing and resisting police brutality. So here in the yellow system, I felt like this, when Steve Jobs was alive, was really representative of how he ran his organization. So here you have complex and rational leadership styles where the most efficient problem solver advances. So even though here we have this leader who's here, but that leader could move out and then the other one replace them if they have the better idea. So in this system, again, remember, we're moving from the simple to the complex problem solving and capacity exercises. So we have self-expression in this system, because remember, it's under the individualist themes, with consideration that it's not at the expense of others. This is what makes it different. Because remember, when you go to tier 2, you start to become more integral. So you have the capacity to kind of see everything below you and recognize those kind of worldviews. And the argument from a lot of the strategy and leadership literature is that yellow and above kind of leaders make the best leader in complex organizations. You have this revolving leadership that is agreed upon after lively discussion of possible approaches by members. So disagreement and debate is encouraged in this environment, but it's not to the ostracization of another person. You don't have people being destroyed for their ideas. If your ideas doesn't work, we might giggle about it, but we'll say, go back to the drawing board, we're going to try Dan's idea. So the leaders will change based on whoever has the best offered knowledge. Infighting for ideas is encouraged, because Steve Jobs did that at Apple. He encouraged people to disagree and argue. But it does not occur at the expense of another individual's self-worth. Members insist on being heard, and no ostracism is allowed when an expressed or creative idea falls during implementation. So I think yellow is where I stopped. And I just wanted to remind everybody to take my survey, of course, and get my little advertising. And I do have some flyers if you still need some flyers, so I'll leave those here. But I just want to close with the fact that spiral dynamic theory is awesome. I think it has very robust applications in many contexts. And it helps us connect to each other and understand how culture evolves, hopefully to our benefit. Thank you. And I can take a few questions if anybody has any. Or any comments you'd like to make, what you think about it.
I have a question.
Sure.
So with the green, when you were showing the green slide, when you talked about the Black Lives Matter movement, would that also be, could you equate that to like even like around the civil rights movement, everybody had a common goal, even though you have pockets of different groups that addressed the movement in different ways, like SNCC and NAACP and so forth? Would that be?
No, because you had a leader. The civil rights movement, you had Dr. King, you had Stokely Carmichael, you had these personalities. Who's the leader of Black Lives Matter? There's not one. Who's the leader of Me Too? It ain't Oprah. She did a good speech, but she leads Me Too. You know, so that's the difference.
So like a leader versus not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions?
I guess I've been like really thinking about this, and I'm like, oh, and it's terrible because I don't know it very well at all. But I'm
That's
trying,
okay.
but I'm trying to always put people places that I shouldn't be, because that's probably on here as being bad. Because I'm like, oh yeah. Anyway, because I'm really like this. Like, where is this going? Like, what are you gonna do next?
Yeah. Oh, for me personally?
Yeah, like what's the
plan? Well, I'm going to produce this scholarship. And as I said, part of my obligation here is to present a colloquium of my scholarship. So I've been doing this research on misogyny noir. So on May 2nd, I'm going to be presenting that. And so I'm looking at how discrimination and animus against black women has impacted them in American society. And I'm really making a distinction between black African women and American women who are the descendants of people who were slaves. And so I want to use spiral dynamic theory to see if the perceived animus is associated with a particular worldview. So am I seeing people say black women are like the dog test? Are some black men saying that they are not attracted to black women because they find them less beautiful or something like that? Is that being expressed, and is that consistent with a particular worldview?
When I was thinking
can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
Also, I plan to do leadership development in schools and talk about, leadership and management styles and stuff like that too. That's another.
Well, the school I used to teach at is very unique. It's serving 20 schools in Cuyahoga County. It's probably 90% African American, and it's funny. Not funny, but when I watched the video, I was wondering like where the background of those kids were being taught, because I remember when I had a student that was a PEP student from basically the inner city. When he came to my school, he was mixed, and he was viewed as inferior in the black culture because he was more white, according to the African American. So it was just kind of like reverse, like psychology. Like he was viewed as not good enough because he was more white in the black community. Now again, I don't know if that was just an isolated case, but that was one of my experiences with a kid that I had in class about 5-6 years ago. That it was just interesting the way. I mean, but again, the kid's dad was in jail for life. The mom committed murder. I mean, the kid was.
The boy that didn't like the light-skinned boy?
No, the boy. I mean, came from a blended family. I think mom was in jail. So there was some racial implications in the home, I think, that might have. But when I remember talking with his case manager, he was almost an outcast in his community because of his skin color.
Right.
So it's like just. But again, that's the whole point of this. But it was just an interesting point, and I was just wondering if.
Okay. I have to be responsible and say that this framework was based on adults. So the behaviors that you would see among adolescents, I don't feel comfortable ascribing it to spiral dynamic theory. But I can talk about colorism. And I think I've mentioned that before. And the perception that you have some people who have a black parent and a white parent, and they refuse to choose. And they say they're mixed race. And so, okay, that is what it is. But to people who self-identify as black, that might be met with suspicion. Why you don't want to be with us? Why you don't want to associate with us? Are you embracing those negative tropes? And to be honest, a lot of times people do, because it's powerful. These stereotypes that get told about African American black people are very, very strong. And what shocked me as I continue to grow and mature is, I guess I grew up in the Alex Haley era for roots, and I thought all Africans would be happy to see black people come back. But what I'm seeing is that they have been contaminated by these narratives about American black people. So they come into the United States sometimes and don't associate with black people because people tell they don't marry them, they don't date them, and they don't get in social circles with them. And similar to what you saw with the Asians, I'm also seeing that usually most of the immigrant Africans are highly educated, or they're coming from backgrounds with a little bit more privilege. They're not like inner city black people who might live in a housing project. You know, they're coming in usually a little bit better position. Yeah.
Lisa, this could go on
Oh yes,
all
of
night.
course.
So the two of you get quick questions and you get time for quick answers. How's that?
Okay.
Go, which one was?
Oh, these are my questions? I thought I was done. Okay.
Mine wasn't a question, mine was just a quick comment. That you're talking about like colorism.
Mhm.
I just know growing up, my grandmother was kind of ignorant towards like darker skinned men, and she used to always say, well, you guys cannot date dark skinned men. She'll just make negative connotations like, oh, he's too black for you. No. So younger, I was only dating biracial or lighter skinned men, like no darker than me.
Mm-hmm.
Not realizing like, okay, I could be missing out just because I'm looking at them by their skin color.
Mm-hmm.
So as I gotten older, I had to take that out of my mind because I was taught that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just funny.
And you know, some people would make the argument that even some of the reactions in these police brutality cases are based upon those kind of fears and tropes that are in their subconscious mind. Well, police officers shoot Tamir Rice in less than 2 seconds. That's weird, right? Especially in a city that made that movie A Christmas Story. Y'all know that story? With a little boy, he had a gun, you know, and no one thinks about little Robbie having a gun being dangerous. But this police officer saw Tamir Rice as a 20-year-old man. He was a 12-year-old. So that's disturbing. But that's the world we live in, and these are the tropes that we have to negotiate. And we have to, you know, kind of become a little bit more aware about this so we can get pushed back to these kind of negative representations that can result in people's lives being taken.
Nick, you have the last question.
I just thought it was, when you were talking about colorism a little bit, I thought about Tiger Woods, as soon as he made his comeback, and how he wouldn't identify himself as African American. He was Cablinasian. He
you know?
Combined because he felt like he was offending his mother by not including her
Right.
culture. So I thought it was,
Yeah, that happens.
Yeah.
You know, it's a number of reasons why people may engage in disassociating or distancing themselves from blackness. And again, as the argument I made earlier, I think it has origins in the shame of our country's experience.